All right, welcome to this explainer. Today we're doing a deep dive, stepping way back into the 7th century to look at a moment of just absolute moral conviction. We're talking about one of those rare historical events where a single, incredibly heavy decision literally sent shockwaves through history, creating ripples we can still feel today. We're going to unpack this defining story of power, unyielding principle, and ultimately, an incredible sacrifice. So as we go through this history together, I want us to really get into that solemn, respectful mindset, because we are looking at the very essence of what it means to stand completely firm against literally insurmountable odds.
But before we even hit the historical specifics, I want you to ask yourself something, and really think about it. What is the true cost of standing up against injustice? Seriously, imagine for a second that you're backed into a corner. Your survival, and even heavier, the survival of your own family, depends entirely on endorsing a system that you know in your gut is profoundly unjust. What would you do? Forced to choose between legitimizing a deeply corrupt power or just facing absolute devastating ruin? Man, it's one of the heaviest questions a person can ever face, and it is the exact anchor for the history we're unpacking right now.
Okay, let's jump right into Section 1, a demand for allegiance, also known as the Umayyad ultimatum.
Practically every massive historical pivot kicks off with a demand. And here, the ruling Umayyad power demanded a totally public declaration of loyalty to cement their authority. They gave an ultimatum that left absolutely zero middle ground. So what we're looking at is a brutally stark power imbalance. On one side, you have Caliph Yazid I. He represents the Umayyad Caliphate, wielding immense worldly, military, and political power, leading what was historically characterized as a profoundly unjust rule. And standing right across from him, Imam Hussain ibn Ali, the grandson of Prophet Muhammad. Now, Hussein held incredible, recognized spiritual lineage and deep moral authority, but he simply didn't have the vast armies that the Caliphate had. It's just a wildly profound contrast, right? The massive, towering machinery of worldly power actively demanding submission from a widely recognized figure of pure spiritual leadership.
Which brings us right to Section 2, opposing unjust rule and the refusal.
So, when all that immense pressure from the Umayyad Caliphate came crashing down, it essentially slammed right into an immovable object. Imam Hussein's refusal to pledge allegiance wasn't just a maybe later, it was absolute. And he fully, completely understood the terrifying danger this defiance meant for him and his followers. Because to pledge allegiance would mean officially endorsing, basically legitimizing Yazid's unjust rule. Hussein knew exactly how much weight his spiritual lineage carried. Actually, scratch that, he knew his word was everything. By withholding that pledge, he made a definitive, unshakable statement. He showed that from his position, unjust rule could not and literally would not be validated, no matter how severe the threat.
Now, we have to realize this wasn't some sudden, random accident of history. What we're seeing is a tragic yet totally inevitable progression. It goes like this. The establishment of an unjust rule naturally triggers a refusal of allegiance from anyone holding real moral authority. And since unjust power almost never tolerates defiance, well, that refusal essentially forces the ultimate sacrifice. It's a direct cause and effect. We are witnessing a strict, logical progression driven by deep-seated principles colliding head-on with these brutal authoritarian demands.
All right, let's move on to Section 3, the meaning of shahadat, a solemn reality.
To really grasp the true weight of this history, we've got to move beyond just timelines and dates. We need to understand the core cultural and spiritual concept that defines this whole event. And that brings us to an absolutely crucial term, shahadat. Now, while it translates broadly to martyrdom, it actually represents something so much deeper. It's the ultimate, willing sacrifice made specifically to uphold moral authority and oppose an unjust rule. When you really understand shahadat, it becomes crystal clear that Imam Hussein's stand was in no way just some political defeat or a bad miscalculation. Not at all. It was a conscious, incredibly deliberate choice made completely willingly for a much higher moral truth. It totally flips the narrative, right? It frames the history not as a story of victimhood, but as a massive, proactive moral victory.
And the historical gravity of this just deepens so much more when you realize Hussein wasn't making this stand alone in some vacuum. His steadfast defiance actually involved his own family members. They stood right there alongside him, totally united in their conviction. Just try to picture the profound, very real human element of this event. This is all unfolding on the incredibly desolate desert plains of Karbala. The physical environment they were in was just as unforgiving as the political one. Yet, there they were, surrounded by this harsh desert landscape, facing absolutely overwhelming military forces, and collectively, they accepted the ultimate sacrifice. It really brings such a deeply emotional, powerful reality to the whole concept of shahadat.
Let's wrap things up with Section 4,
A legacy of defiance, echoes in history.
You know, worldly power is so often just fleeting. Armies eventually scatter, empires crumble, and kings get forgotten by time. But a willing sacrifice made in the name of moral authority, standing tall against tyranny? Man, that echoes, it really does. Hussein's defiance completely transformed into this eternal symbol that has resonated for centuries. So we're ending today exactly where we began, with that same heavy question. If faced with an unjust rule, would you have the conviction to make the ultimate sacrifice? The story of Imam Hussein's shahadat really challenges us to look inward and ask what principles we hold so dear that we would literally risk everything to defend them. Take a minute to just reflect on the enduring power of this ancient defiance against tyranny and what it might actually demand of us in our own modern world. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this leaves you with plenty to think about.